Hi, everybody. I started the lecture without my slide up, but I'm going to start back at here. So, cultural relativism is where we left off in the last lecture, and it's something I wanted to sit on for just a little bit longer because it's very, very important to social work. We deal with humans, we're diverse, we have different cultures, different backgrounds, we have our own personal background and culture, and so it is something that definitely comes into play when we are making decisions and determining what's ethical and what's the appropriate course of action and intending to do the least amount of harm to an individual. So to recap, ethical relativism is where culture is the determinant for what is moral and right or wrong, and it's the ethics value base. And so this differs slightly from the subjective, which is very much an individual person. This is showing culture as kind of the driving force about what is right or wrong, moral, and the culture itself is considered the highest authority. Now, when you're in the individual, obviously your culture is going to influence you in some way, but there might be variations within a culture if you're looking at it from a subjective relativism perspective. So, cultural relativism refers to not judging a culture to our own standards of what is right or wrong, strange or normal. And so we need to be aware that we come into any situation with our biases, with our preconceived notion, with our own determinant of what is right or wrong or acceptable or normal. And we need to be aware that our culture tints everything that we see, whether implicit, explicit, intentional, unintentional. It is something that we carry with us and makes us unique as human beings. So knowing that, we need to try to understand cultural practices of other groups in the context of their own specific culture instead of viewing individuals' cultures through the lens of our own specific culture, because it's going to taint it and not necessarily give it an unbiased perspective or actually be able to dive into a deeper understanding. So I think one of the examples I like to talk about when thinking about cultural relativism occurred when I was visiting some internship sites in the country of Uganda. So we place students through, it's not called, sorry, I just had a massive brain fart. Students from Kuiper are able to do international internships in Uganda. We partner with Uganda Christian University. They are located, obviously, in Uganda. And what happens is students will go become students at the university, and then they are able to do their internships at different organizations within the community. And what's really cool about that is that these are not organizations that are run by Westerners or somebody coming in with a perception that they know how to run social services in the context of Uganda, but rather it's from people who are from the community, the Ugandans, who understand the culture, the context, and can make very specifically appropriate services and interventions. So one of the places is run through Compassion International, which I think a lot of us might be familiar with because it's often seen as, this is how you sponsor the children. You pay your $40 a month to sponsor a child. However, this is not necessarily that macro piece of it. It's the actual micro services where the children who are sponsored then are receiving services through this specific agency that we partner with. And so one of the supervisors was sharing a story with me that when she was out doing home visits, so they'll go visit children and families who are part of their program to make sure they're safe, they're getting their needs met, they have their resources. So the supervisor and then the intern from the United States were going on a visit. And during this visit, it was disclosed by the mother that she was being physically abused by the male head of the household. I don't remember if they were married or if he was just the father, but he was the male head of the household. And so the intern's natural inclination, and probably mine as well, would be to be like, hey, we need to call whatever your version of CPS is. We need to report it to authorities. We're mandated reporters. This is considered abuse. we need to take the appropriate actions, which in all of our training that we give you in the Western context is call CPS, call CPS, call CPS. Well, the supervisor was like, yep, nope, we aren't calling the police. And that goes against everything that we teach and instruct social work students to do. So the social work student obviously questioned it and was like, no, I'm a mandated reporter. I need to do this. Tell me why we can't do this. Like, he needs to be punished and this abuse needs to stop. So the supervisor then went on to explain that, yes, they do believe in the dignity and worth of individuals and that abuse is not acceptable. However, if they were to go to the police to report him, let's say they did arrest him and take him away, how would the mother get her needs met? The male was the main provider of the house. It would take away their source of income. It would take away some of the safety and protection from other people in the community. The sentence might not even stick because there's not necessarily the same protocols or hierarchy in the same, like the court systems there. And so it might end up making matters worse when he came back, and it necessarily wouldn't stop the problem. So within the cultural context, it's a very community-based society. And so their approach then was to spread it throughout the village and have people in the community come shame him verbally for doing this to his the mother of his children. And so using that approach, so not the court system, but knowing that it was a community context. And if the ladies and the individuals in the community came and berated him and told him to stop and told him that he was a worthless piece of whatever, was more powerful in stopping the abuse and keeping the mother and the children safe, as well as having their needs provided for, that was the appropriate intervention given the cultural context. So even though it might have initially felt like the student wasn't doing their duty as a mandated reporter, they needed to be aware that that was acceptable in the case because they had to understand the context of where the event was occurring and then responding in a way that was culturally appropriate. And so what's right for possibly an abuse case in Western society was not the right response or the appropriate response to an abuse case in Uganda. But does that make one more right or more wrong? Not necessarily. And that's where the idea of and support for relativism does come in. So that's a very specific example of how this concept can create safety and support for individuals and actually be a good thing. So this next slide is going to actually kind of expound on that a little bit, the advantages of relativism. So both cultural and subjective, is it does allow for diversity because it's present in the world. We're not robots, we're humans. We come in with different perceptions, different experiences, different worldviews. And so it does allow for differing truths and for some of the gray in situations to be present and help drive our decisions. It understands that life is not black and white, and that cultures might believe that their practices are more justifiable than other cultural practices, but using that relativist approach does allow for acceptance between different viewpoints, experiences, peoples, cultures, just like that example I gave. So similarly to ethical absolutism, I had you identify a beneficial a benefit to the viewpoint, as well as maybe how the viewpoint can be harmful. I'm going to have you do the same thing for relativism. So some of the disadvantages is just because there are different moral views, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of them actually are helpful and promote well-being and safety for humans. So an example, which is a very sad, horrible example, is how the Nazis believed that they were right to kill millions of Jews, homosexuals, and disabled people in the pursuit of what they believed would be a pure and holy race. And so they were driving their decisions and ethical behaviors based on their own viewpoint, where in fact it caused a lot of harm and destruction and death unnecessarily. But cultural relativists could not criticize the actions of the Nazis because they do believe that all cultures have views of equal worth. And so that's kind of the harm, where it doesn't give a lot of meat to someone's position of saying that something is right or wrong, because they're straight up acknowledging that everybody is entitled to their own moral viewpoint. And so it does make it difficult to decide when rules need changing in different circumstances. And so if you're thinking about the absolutism and relativism, it's kind of this pendulum. Absolutism is on the far end of the spectrum. Pure relativism is on the far other end. And so they're complete opposites. It's kind of this continuum. And so there's kind of this gray area for like, are you kind of like a not a Coke Zero, but like an absolute zero, or a diet relativism, like not quite the thing, but just like a lighter version of it. There is room for that. And again, it's trying to figure out where we stand on the continuum, because it does impact how we approach situations and view our clients in other scenarios that we might encounter. So now we're going to throw in religion, because that's something that often comes up with religion and free will. And if our faith system has absolute right or wrongs, the 10 Commandments, or we're saying that God is the Christian God is right or wrong, he has the absolute standard for what, and he's unchanging, so right and wrong is never going to change. Is there room to have a relativist perspective within religion? And I think that this one came very present in the most recent election. It was the midterms around Proposal 3. And so there was a lot of discussion between different parties, different religious camps, different perspectives, that some people believed that Proposition 3, because it did deal with abortion laws, ability to have gender-affirming treatment, a lot of different nuances, that absolutists, especially from a faith-based camp, said you should not vote yes on Proposal 3 because it allows for abortion to occur, and there should never be a situation where abortion is considered ethical or moral. Then you had the camp that said, yes, you should vote for Proposal 3 because there might be situations where abortion is necessary. Is it at the harm, or in a case of rape, is it going to endanger the life of the mother? Is it not a viable pregnancy in general? And so you have this one proposal, and you have people coming at it from a very absolute and a relativist perspective, throwing in the faith card. I don't like the word faith card, but throwing in the fact that a lot of people who were voting came from a religious perspective. What did that look like? What drove their decisions? I am not a politician, and I actually really hate politics, which is probably not good as a social worker because it's something that is really important to the profession. However, people were pulling specific pieces from the proposal to justify their stances, and people were throwing in religion, and people were throwing in different aspects to it. And this is not a platform saying of how you should or should not have voted. That is personal preference and personal viewpoints. But it just shows that you can it might just be a proposal on a ballot, but you've got religion to throw in there, and culture, and situations, and what's right, what's wrong. Is there gray? Is there not gray? And you might have your profession that you're in might be conflicting with this. And so one of the tenets of social work is self-determination and having the right to make a choice. So is voting yes on the proposal allowing clients to have self-determination? But if your faith-based system is saying that abortion is murder, is voting yes for it negating what your faith-based says? But then if you vote no on it, saying nope, you should never have abortion should never be allowed, there should not be the opportunity for gender specific care, then you have to look at your client and say, hey, I voted on something that I'm saying that you should have the right to. It is really, really, really difficult and interesting to navigate. this profession as a Christian and trying to figure out what happens when your personal values and your professional values might have a disconnect. And then what do you do?